I'm Aubrey Sitterson, and this is SKALD. You're listening to the only story that matters. This is true oral storytelling. I write every episode myself, and then, like the Scandinavian bards known as skalds, I perform each of them in one single flawless take. This is the best episode yet, so go ahead and dive right in here. Later, if you want the backstory, you can listen to previous episodes of the podcast for free, or pick up the prose volumes on Amazon for only $2.99 each. This isn't me reading you a story. This is me telling you a story. This is SKALD, part 63. The spear, that gleaming, black, fell weapon, spoke to her. Not in words. No, they were well beyond that. They were far beyond mere words. The spear spoke with the pulsing rhythms of those glowing arteries, the red rivulets that ran erratically through that blackened head, the ones that forced their way down the spear's shaft to where the sorceress Caleria clutched that fearsome weapon, grimacing. The spear spoke in fell rhythms. It sang sweet, deadly songs to Caleria. It told her things she could not comprehend, but that she had always known, and it urged her on. It urged her forward. It urged her down and up as she channeled her considerable powers through that dire weapon, as she used those powers, as she summoned up the flame, compressed it, redirected it toward that heaving monster, that howling beast, the one that, having tired of devouring Ravenna's foundation, had been tired of life in the darkness, of life subterranean, had begun to claw its way up out of the ground. The spear spoke to Caleria. They laughed together, and she set about subduing the Titan. It wasn't the first time that the spear had spoken to her. When Maul had thrown it down, when he had cast it aside unceremoniously, it had let loose a harsh, deadened clatter. But within that dark dissonance, within that chaotic cacophony, Caleria had heard something else. A siren song. One that caused something within her to quiver with excitement. One that caused the hair on her arms to stand up. One that put the taste of blood in her mouth and the desire for more in her heart. So as Maul took back his cudgel, that hateful, common, crude chunk of wood, and grinning stupidly, demanded also the stone head of the giant Kargan. Caleria had stooped low and reached down. When she arose, she held a weapon befitting her and her desires, her and her strength, her and the power she would channel through it. She held that gleaming, black, fell spear. Now, with the spear whispering its awful, beautiful melodies, she joined with those ancient wizards, joined with the twins Henno and Patro, her benefactor and his eternal rival. She joined them in their magnificent effort, in their impossible task. She joined them in their attempt to subdue the Titan. It was a horrible sight to behold. The massive, bloated, suffering creature attempted to break through the earth itself. With its weak, useless limbs, with its squalling mouth, with its pink body covered in blood, tears, and worse, it struggled to free itself from the ground, to emerge triumphantly into the world above. But that sickening birth was one that Henno, that Patro, that Caleria could not allow. Because if the Titan freed itself, if the Titan could crawl up onto the surface of the earth, if its atrophied limbs and snapping, starving jaws could be freed, if they were set loose upon Ravenna, then all would be lost. As it was already little to salvage, little to save, as the very foundations of the city, foundations architectural, magical, structural, and personal, had been irrevocably damaged, had been shattered beyond recognition. But still, not everything was gone. Some buildings still stood. Some proctors still fought. Some life still existed in the once great city of Ravenna, in Henno's city, in Caleria's city, in what should one day be hers. But if the Titan was loosed, if the Titan had its way, that wouldn't long be the case. So, though the brothers Henno and Patro reviled one another, though they hated each other more than anything, their love for Ravenna, or rather, their desire for it, their lust for that ever-growing city-state, was still greater. So as their avarice outstripped their enmity, they joined reluctantly together. They combined their forces, and they set out to save their city. And Caleria, harnessing magics both learned and given, both earned and bartered for, set out to help them. First, Caleria could do little but stand in awe, as the brothers who she had only ever known as mortal enemies, as equal but opposing forces, ever jockeying for position, could only stare, slack-jawed, as they began to, for the first time in eons, work together. They deftly spun their magics, weaving them together with a shocking alacrity, seeking to stop the Titan at all costs. They summoned nets, the Titan tore. They summoned chains, the Titan broke. They called upon every eldritch incantation that they had ever learned. They created new spells in the moment. They did everything they could. But to no avail. The Titan kept roaring, kept fighting, kept climbing up out of that earthen womb. As the Titan crawled upward, as Henno and Patro continued to assail it with their magics, exhausting their already exhausted reserves, searching for any sigil not broken, any spell not depleted, Caleria began to hear it clearer and brighter than she had ever heard before. The voice, the song, the unmistakable melody of crackling embers, of rising flame, and of settling ash. The spear shook in her grasp, not in an effort to escape, no, but in an effort to rouse the sorceress, to urge her forward. That song of catharsis, with a hymn of destruction roaring in her ears, with the drive of necessity flashing in her eyes, Caleria hefted the spear and pointed it at the Titan. Grythana had told her tales. Grythana, her grandmother, had regaled her with stories, had used them to frighten her into obedience, to terrify her into diligence. She had urged her grandchild, the first queen of the Pharaoh, had urged Rashka to remember Maul's brutality, to remember his violence, to remember the aura of all-consuming destruction that hovered about him, to remember that he was what waited in the darkness, that the hungry flame that animated him would not be put out, would never be extinguished, and that it was left to her, left to only her, to hold it at bay. But still, even with those stories, even after a childhood tormented by nightmares of that frothing madman, that raging lunatic, that violent marauder, Rashka, the queen of the Pharaoh, was woefully unprepared to gaze upon Maul's true menace. Because even though they were united for the moment, even though they were allies, albeit reluctant ones, even though their causes were the same while they were still aligned, she was aghast at the horror Maul contained within him. She was horrified by the terror that he meted out to his foes. She was terrified of the fire that flashed in his eyes with every single, uncompromising, inelegant, brutal strike from that simple, crude, blackened, notched, and blood-stained cudgel, and the grotesque stone visage that the brute had sloppily fastened to it. They had barely left the tower. After a sprint that she and her warriors, her honor guard, the finest fighters that the Pharaoh peoples could muster, a sprint that left them panting, left them exhausted, left them broken and weakened. They had barely left the tower, and their considerable reserves of vitality were already depleted, run dry by a relentless downward plummeting, by trying to keep up with that savage, that brute, that oaf Maul as he rocketed downstairs, skipping 1, 2 entire flights in his ecstatic, bloodthirsty charge. And upon leaving the tower, struggling to stay upright as their lungs spasmed and fought for air, they, Queen Rashka and those of her warriors who had been able to keep up, they looked on in an amazement that would have been reverential if what they observed hadn't been so terrible, so hateful, so vicious and callously destructive. They watched as Maul set to work, as he set about doing the only thing he excelled at, the only thing he truly cared to do: sowing the seeds of sucking death and blackened cataclysm. The Pharaoh were no strangers to battle. They had been trained from childhood, from infancy in many cases, trained to take a life without hesitation, without delay, without questioning or regret. They had been trained, and trained exquisitely, to attack their foes, to strike down their opposition, to kill their enemies. What they saw from Maul, what they saw from the one true king of flames and ashes, something else entirely. Maul didn't launch himself at his enemies. He didn't lash out at his foes. No, those he sent into that inky black void of nothingness were whoever was standing closest. Fleeing workers, panicked slaves, weeping proctors, and even a Farron warrior who is foolish enough to take up a flanking position alongside the savage king. He roared and he lashed out with every limb. He transformed himself into a maelstrom of violence, glowing and ever moving, like the ever-shifting eight-armed star, emblazoned upon his chest. But in short order, Rashka, Queen Rashka, was forced to pull herself out of her trance, the one she fell into while watching Maul's rhythmic, hypnotic dance of death. Though her lungs still ached, though her warriors were in no shape to do anything but suck breath through their gaping mouths, she knew they had to move. She knew that time was of the essence. She knew that she could not trust Maul, could not rely upon that brutish defiler any further than she could throw his bulky, savage form. And she could see that Maul, the one true king of flames and ashes, had no intention of waiting for her. So she urged her warriors forward. She did as she had always done. She did as all leaders must, all good leaders. She stormed ahead. She led from the front, and she chased after Maul as fast as her nimble Farron legs could carry her. They chased after Maul, struggling to keep up with him, as the blows he rained down on Ravana's fleeing populace, the ones that seemed to delight him, to elicit grim, bloodthirsty cackles and laughs, the ones that, though brutal, though skull-crushing, though senses-shattering and life-ending, seemed not to slow him down in the least. She ran. She ran faster than she ever had. She pulled ahead of her warriors, but still, it wasn't enough. She could barely keep pace with Maul, much less catch up to him. She began to worry about what that beast, that monster, would do, left unaccompanied, if she wasn't there to strike him down once his purpose had been served. She began to panic. Then she heard a voice, gentle and sweet, a voice that she had always known but never heard, one that she had always longed for and always feared, a voice that began with a whisper and ended with a shout, a voice that came from her breast, from beneath her finely woven cloak, beneath her supple leathers, beneath her thin but powerful Farron armor, a voice that came from that precious artifact, that for which she had ventured everything, for which she had risked everything, for which she had handed over her flesh and her blood, her most trustworthy advisor, handed over her own grandmother to that treacherous old wizard. She heard a voice that spoke clearly and plainly, a voice that could only come from one place. That long, twisting alabaster horn. It spoke to her in a language that she did not know, but one that nonetheless frightened her, one that held a meaning deeper than meaning, that spoke words older than language. But though she couldn't decipher it, the horn's speech wove its spell, one that heated the horn where it lay next to her skin, and that warmth, it grew quickly and riotously until it seeped down into her chest. It invigorated her pounding heart, it soothed her spasming lungs, and it gave her the strength, the power, the desire, the need, and the ability to press on, to run faster, to leave her warriors gasping for breath in her wake, and to catch up with Maul. The brute was surprised at first, taken aback, shocked that anyone could keep pace with one such as him. But his surprise soon gave way to joy as he flashed a smile at his grandniece, a smile that she was horrified to recognize, a smile that contained a willful arrogance, a dangerous pride, and beneath it all, a threat of never-ending violence. It was a smile that she had seen before, a smile that she had seen on the lips of her grandmother, and a smile that she had felt her own lips instinctively form in grim response. They ran together, tirelessly, effortlessly, the finest fruits of a once great civilization, the true claimants to a mighty throne, the royalty and rightful rulers of the realm of men and the wandering pharaoh. They forged ahead, ready to strike down those who had tormented them, those who had taken from them, those who had stolen everything they had, stolen everything that matters. They charged forward with a thirst for blood, with an insatiable desire to smash the works of their enemies, to grind their bones into dust, to take club and gleaming sword to the skull and throat of the High Elves and their cold, pulchritudinous ruler, Queen Enlith. They charged ahead. They ran to the center of town, to the place where Maul had first re-entered that border realm, riding upon the writhing roots of the world tree, the one he had planted in that dying world, had nourished with the corpse of his dead companion, had watered with his scalding hot tears. They ran to the center of town, to where that tree grew and grew, to where the remaining trolls stood as macabre statues, grim warnings of a future that lurks just beyond sight. They ran to the center of town, where Henno promised them that they would find the High Elves. And though Henno was a liar, a deceiver, an untrustworthy scoundrel, here he spoke truly, because surrounding the town square, surrounding the center of that dying city, surrounding that giant, majestic ash tree, the one that even as they looked upon it, stretched its boughs upward and its roots downward, surrounding it all, were the High Elves. They rushed ahead. Rashka put a lifetime of tactical training, of strategic education to use. She counted the opposition: archers, footmen, mages, war priests, and clerics, at least 5 maniples worth. And beyond those arrogant, sneering High Elves, with their bows drawn, their swords brandished, and their spells woven, she saw dwarves, hard at work with axe, with shovel, with rope, and with flame, working quickly, diligently, to fell the ash, to sever its roots, to tear it from the ground itself. Maul howled as as they approached. The cry of an animal, a wounded, damaged beast with nothing to lose. And as his horrible yell echoed off ravenous, crumbling buildings, that monster, that vicious tyrant, Enlith, looked up with fear, with hate, and with rage contorting her radiant features. No. Possible. She whispered to herself before drawing her sword, and turning to the dwarves behind her. Work on! Stop for no one! The tree must fall! Rashka had hoped for the advantage of surprise, had hoped to sneak up on the high elves, to take them unaware, or, at the very least, to flank them as they dealt with some other threat. But Maul's shout, his pained war cry, his reflexive scream of bloodthirsty rage and fury, had rendered her plan impossible. For a moment, thought to slow their charge, to stop and use what seconds they had, the mere moments before the archers let loose their arrows, before the mages and priests wove their arcane spells, to use them to make a plan, to chart a course, to ascertain how best to defeat their foes. But as Maul screamed, as his yell rose in pitch and volume, it touched something inside of her. It stirred something deep within her, something primal and atavistic, a piece of herself that she had been taught to drive down, to lock away, to protect and imprison at all costs. She felt it awaken. She felt her skin tingle, felt her muscles quiver, and her blood start to boiling. And she loved it. She did what her forefathers had always done. She did what her great uncle did by her side. She did that which separated her kind millennia before, what had earned them the throne and the royal bearing for which she and Maul both still fought. She let the rage take her. She gave herself to that primal fury. She abandoned strategy and tactics. She motivated herself by hate and hate alone. And she forged ahead. The High Elves were wholly unprepared. Accustomed to civilized, sophisticated battles, to skirmishes that followed some semblance of rules, of protocol, of decorum, they had no idea how to deal with not one, but two rampaging brutes, two stampeding beasts, two members of a slighted, rage-fueled race that smashed against their formations, heedless of injury, unafraid of death, shattering and scattering their line in an instant. And once that line was broken, once that meticulous formation of archers, footmen, mages, war priests, and clerics had been disrupted, that is when the horror truly began. That is when Maul's worship truly began, as his cudgel swung through air thick with sweat, blood, and fear, bringing death wherever it landed, weaving that hymn of destruction, a song punctuated by the cracking of skulls and pitiable death rattles. But Maul's song was not a solo. No, for the first time, he played with accompaniment. That tune of death was given additional verve, additional volume, additional strength as Maul's cries harmonized with those of his niece, those of Queen Rashka, who took just as much pleasure in that hymn, the one that had played in her very blood since the day she was conceived, the one that gave life and brought death as she aided her relative, as she aided the one true king of men, and together they slaughtered the high elf invaders. They were covered in blood, that of their foes, no small amount of their own. They were wounded, they were weakened, but they were far from finished. Panting, smiling, showing gleaming white rictus grins and faces covered in that sanguine horror, standing back to back, they surveyed their handiwork. They looked out upon the dead and the dying high elves, upon the terrified dwarves, the ones who kept working, kept slaving away diligently, the ones who remained steadfast, because even though they feared the bloody death dealers that had fallen upon their number, they still feared Enlith more. And most of all, they feared what would happen if they failed her, if that world tree, that new world tree, that imposter took root and flourished. But amidst the dead and the dying, amidst the gruesome remnants of those valiant, vanquished warriors, stalking across that bloody killing floor, were two figures still standing, two figures that emanated beauty, royalty, prestige, and power. Queen Enlith and her consort, King Roland. It's fitting, then. Enlith scowled as she swung her sword in wide arcs, its flawless steel ringing out in chimes as it cut the air. I shall fell the tree. I will kill the brute, and then I will bring you to heel, girl, all in a single day. Sight of her tormentor, at the sight of the tyrant, of the ruler of the high elves, of those who had banished her people and hunted them to near extinction, who pursued their genocidal goals across the sundered worlds. The fire in Rashka's blood flared. You witch, you monster, you fool! You would come here, come to this realm, to my realm, and you would challenge me? Rashka raised her sword and lowered her brows. I should kill you. By every law, both mortal and divine, my blade should quench its thirst with your wicked blood. But I won't. Not yet. No. Instead, I will bind you and I will hold you. I will keep you prisoner. I will make your every waking moment a living terror, a nightmare from which you will never awaken until I, and I alone, allow you to, until I allow you to pass into that inky black void of nothingness. Rashka lunged forward as she leapt toward Enlith, toward her people's mortal enemy. Something exploded at the base of her skull. Her vision filled with blinding white light. Stars exploded in her head as something hard and stone hit that crucial spot, the point just beneath her skull, shattering her senses, stunning her into submission as she crumpled to the ground. She gasped for breath. She pleaded for another chance. She begged for her opportunity to bring the misery that Enlith so richly deserved. But she couldn't move. She could do nothing as she gazed up at the sky, as her vision filled with a familiar sight. That brutal, monstrous savage, the one true king of flames and ashes. Maul. What? Why? Please. She stammered as hot, scalding tears filled her eyes as she watched Maul approach, watched the woad blue tattoo shining through the gore that covered him, watched as he wielded that blackened makeshift hammer, the one that now bore stains of her blood as well as countless others upon its leering head, the very visage that had laid her low with a single bite. Together we could help each other. Maul snorted contemptuously. Stupid girl. I never needed your help. He stooped down, that familiar rictus grin spreading across his face. As he removed the prize, as he removed that gleaming artifact, that long, twisting alabaster horn, removed it from its place around Roshka's throat, lowering his foot down in its place. And as Roshka gasped for air, as she found herself surrounded twice over by the inky black void of nothingness and the cackling, endless laughter it contained, she heard Maul, her uncle, her very flesh and blood, speak to her one final time. I already have everything I need. SKALD is a completely DIY project with no advertisers, which means that this show needs your support to keep going. And one of the best, easiest ways to support SKALD? Review it on iTunes, Amazon, Google Play, or Stitcher. Banditti says, listen now. Simply put, SKALD is incredible. Not only is Aubrey a master of spoken word media, but he has proven week after week that he is also a master of prose. Not many places will you find the combination of a masterful author and a thoroughly engaging storytelling. SKALD, however, is one of those very few. Stop whatever it is you're doing and listen to SKALD now. What's SKALD worth to you? $1 per episode? $5 a month? More? Whatever it is, head to patreon.com/SKALD today and sign up to help keep the show going and growing. I don't waste your time with advertisers or affiliate programs, but I do need to make money to afford rising bandwidth costs as well as the time involved with crafting this epic tale. If you dig SKALD, show it proudly by signing up at patreon.com/SKALD today. Every Tuesday, please talk about and plug SKALD on social media, and make sure to tag me so I can share your posts. I'm Aubrey Sitterson on Facebook, Twitter, Tumblr, Instagram, and Snapchat. You can also hit up AubreySitterson.com for links to everything, including SKALD, my wrestling talk show Straight Shoot, and my comics work. Issue number 4 of Street Fighter and G.I. Joe out now from IDW Publishing. Also, you can find my bio, contact information, and more. Are you hungry for more podcast listening goodness? Then look no further than Rumor Flies, a fellow member of the Dark Myths Podcast Collective. Every week, Ryan Caligari, Joshua Hanses, and Greg Tilton take a look at some of your favorite rumors, myths, and misconceptions, exploring the origins, evolution, and veracity of each one. Check them out on your favorite podcasting platform or at rumorfliespodcast.com. Thanks for listening. I'll talk at you next week.